Welcome to Pop Psych 101
where we, licensed therapist Ryan Engelstad,
and licensed psychologist Dr. Hayley Roberts
break down and analyze how mental health is represented in movies, shows, books, and across the pop culture and social media landscape.
We will determine what lines up with real life and what is just pop culture fantasy.
This is Pop Psych 101. Welcome back to Pop Psych 101. I am licensed therapist Ryan Engelstad, here as always with my co-host, Dr. Hayley Roberts.
Hello.
Hello, Hayley. We are back for, I don't remember doing an episode of Pop Psych where we covered the same thing again. So this might be our first
Sequel.
Repeat. Well, it's not a repeat. It's season 2.
Yeah. I'm excited about it because this is such a good one.
Well, we couldn't not do it because the season 2 of Ted Lasso, which we're going to be talking about today, just so intentionally dives into mental health issues that even though we covered season 1 in a previous episode of Pop Psych, we couldn't not do season 2. So we are going to get into all of that after the break. But first, I know you all might be listening to this at the end of the summer, but for us, it is still springtime. And luckily, that means the start of some summer vacations, at least for me. So, Hayley, it brings to mind, I know we both like to travel. Mm-hmm. And, I think we both probably have like our typical vacation spots. But COVID has had me sort of daydreaming at times of just like, well, what if I could go anywhere, anytime? Mm-hmm. Like, wouldn't that be nice? And wouldn't it be nice if the world supported that? So I'm going to ask you this hypothetical question. If you could teleport to anywhere in the world, let's just say for a week's vacation, where would you go and why?
Yeah, anywhere.
Anywhere.
Yeah, the first thing that pops to mind would be New Zealand. I'd love to just rent like a camper van and drive around New Zealand, go snowboarding, go just like hanging out down at the lower altitudes. I've never been to New Zealand, but I would love it. And I also think that it's one of the places that it's just harder to get to.
Right. It feels like a bigger trip you have to plan.
Yeah. And usually when I'm going to the Southern Hemisphere, I'm going to South Africa. And so
nice.
So the Australias and the New Zealands haven't happened yet, but they're on the list. What about you?
Yeah, that's a cool one. So not Hobbit Trail, New Zealand.
Oh, yeah, no, I couldn't care less.
Too touristy? Yeah.
I'm sure I could care less about some things, but yeah, no, it's like it's not that interesting.
Not on your itinerary. Okay, yeah. That's fair. Maybe if you were there for a month, you might stop by.
Well, if it's like, on your drive, you're passing it, I would
be
like, oh yeah, I'll definitely stop and see that. That's cool. But it's definitely not like that. I need to go there to see this thing.
I think there's probably enough other stuff going on there, to your point. Yes.
Yeah. And it's just so beautiful from what I've heard. So yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. How about you? Where are you popping off to?
Well, I'm of two minds with this because my wife and I joke that depending on when our vacation is and sort of what our goal is, I either want to do like museums and crazy food experiences and like history and town and culture, or I want to sit on a beach for a week and not do anything. Well, like, do like beachy things, but nothing else. So I don't know if there are a lot of places where you can do both of those things. Spain. But the place that like most comes to mind for me, and I've been to Italy before, but we had a very brief experience with their like Mediterranean beach lifestyle.
Yeah.
And I only got to do a little bit we didn't do Venice.
Oh, I love Venice.
Oh, we did. Yeah, and exactly. So I want to be able to go somewhere where I could go to a beach and hang out for, I don't know, like 2 or 3 days. What's that, like the Amalfi Coast, or is that Greece? I don't know. Mediterranean Sea areas.
Greece is
and
also really nice.
And then whenever I felt like it, probably like hop on a train to some 2,000-year-old churches and museums, and obviously amazing food as well.
Yeah. That's great. I went to Galway in 2019, and they had both nice beaches and museums. But you've got to be so careful with Ireland because you could have what I had, which was like really lovely warm weather, or it could just be cold the whole time, and it's not reliable.
Cold and rainy the whole time. Yeah, we've done Ireland as well. It's incredible. Yeah, so that's what I'm thinking right now, and maybe that's just because I have like a carb craving, but I'm okay with that. I've never been to Rome, so like Rome is another one, like thousands of years of history and old stuff. That'd be really cool.
Yeah, Rome's super interesting. What I love about those older cities is there's so many like hole in the wall, quote unquote, restaurants, which are actually just like an old couple who are like running it out of their like entry hall.
Like the best food you'll have is in like a weird alley with a door that's not
it's like it's just an old woman standing outside saying, "Come on in." You're like, okay, I guess this
just
is where
making
we're
chicken.
eating. Totally. So funny. So let's teleport.
So that we can dream of that, and that being a reality in our world sometime again soon, hopefully. So we'll just have a nice imaginary journey to season 2 of Ted Lasso right after this break. Hey everyone, Ryan here. No ad this week, but a quick request. We would love to know where you follow us, so if you wouldn't mind taking 10 seconds while you're listening to today's episode, reach out to us on your social media of choice. Say hi, say what's up, request an episode topic. We would love to hear from you. And now, back to the episode. Pop Psych 101 discusses mental health as it is portrayed in pop culture media, and because of this, we often cover sensitive topics that can be triggering for some listeners.
We also delve into the characters and plots of these stories, and therefore, spoilers abound.
So please, use your discretion as you listen to the rest of the episode. Ted Lasso stars Jason Sudeikis as Ted Lasso, a small-time college football coach from Kansas, hired to coach a professional soccer team in England despite having no experience coaching soccer. And this is season 2 of Ted Lasso, airing on Apple TV, wherever you stream your streams. So season 2 picks up Ted Lasso and Richmond AFC after they've been relegated, and season 2 picks up, actually we're already a couple games into the season where they've had a streak of ties. Very frustrating for any sports team just to have a bunch of ties. And then in the first episode of season 2, Danny, one of the star strikers for the team, unfortunately and tragically accidentally kills the team dog during a penalty shot. So that emotional moment that the whole team experiences, and Danny in particular, leads Ted and Richmond AFC to getting a therapist. And the moment that I feel, Hayley, we have to jump in on is Ted's initial reaction to the idea of bringing a therapist in. Because Higgins mentions like, oh yeah, a lot of teams do this and they've had some great success with it. And I will lead you in with, what do you see from Ted's reaction to this initial idea?
A very Ted reaction, which is
very Ted. Yes.
No matter how hesitant or reluctant he is, that smile and positive attitude stays stuck on his face. Yeah, I think the quote that he ends up saying is, "I have a general apprehension and a modern Midwestern skepticism," which
that's right.
Absolutely describes how he feels about it. Like, he's not into the idea, but he is the coach that is like supports everybody's idea kind of no matter what. And I think he finds himself caught between those two things.
Well, yeah, and you marked in the notes, it's one of the funniest sort of subtle moments where they sort of like sound good and he says yes, but he shakes his head no.
Yep.
Which I just love, because unless you're really paying attention to his like emotional, like non-verbal reaction, it just sounds like, oh man, Ted's just fully on board. Like, what a great guy, even though he has skepticism. And it's like, no. Well, obviously we see as it builds up and we meet Dr. Sharon, he's actually very opposed to this idea. And that opposition only builds and builds as he gets to know her.
And Beard looks at him like, wait, but you're shaking your head no, but you're saying yes. And Beard's just like, I'm just going to let that one slide. So funny.
Yes, Beard, the king of like nonverbal reactions of the series.
Yeah.
We love a Coach Beard. Just eye reaction.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, so they bring Dr. Sharon Fieldstone in, and she's great, and we'll talk all about her. But I wanted to kind of touch on this quote that you brought up, and we'll do a whole bunch of quotes, I think, maybe in an extra piece about Ted Lasso here.
Yeah.
But the sort of
bonus episode.
Yes, a bonus episode, but the sort of Midwestern skepticism and a general apprehension, I think that's a really relatable way to identify how a lot of people feel about therapy.
Yeah.
This sort of idea of like, yeah, good for them if they're in therapy, but I don't know. I mean, okay, sure. I'm sure you've experienced that, whether it's, for me, it's working with people who are, maybe mandated into treatment for one reason or another. I've worked with a lot of people in those situations, but you get it a lot from parents or partners or kids of people that we're working with as well. So what's your sense of people who have maybe that sort of sense of skepticism?
Yeah, I think there were pockets of the world where it's always been an option. And I think those are like Freudian psychoanalytic pockets. So like New York jumps to mind, and then like places in Germany and Austria, like they kind of jump to mind. But I think in general, the theme was therapy is for people who are sick, or like people who have problems. Whereas now we're starting to realize that therapy is for people who are human, because we all have moments of struggle. And I think because of that, like generationally, younger people are more comfortable going in and speaking with a therapist. But I'm also finding that like the older generations today are seeing it as an option, whereas as teenagers and young adults, it certainly was not an option, and they never would have considered it. But I think that idea of general apprehension and skepticism definitely is often how, when people call me and they say, you're the first therapist that I'm talking to, they generally say like, I'm not really sure what this is, like I'm not really sure how to do this or what is happening. And I always love that, because I'm like, great, you're already doing it. Like we're just calling me and talking to me, this is what it is. And we'll work on it together, and we'll piece it together. But yeah, Ted's definitely not alone. I think that room as a whole really kind of described how community as a whole feels about it, where some people were like, yeah, this is a logical option, and other people were like, I don't know. And other people, I think Roy was just like, no, absolutely not, like not for me. So I think there was like the range of experience there.
Yeah, and as the episode progresses and we meet the doc, we get a little bit more insight into Ted's skepticism and apprehension. He admits to Dr. Beard. He admits to Beard.
Ooh,
he feels like a doctor sometimes.
He got a promotion.
Yes. He admits to Coach Beard that his previous experience with therapy, his only previous experience with therapy, was in couples counseling, where his wife, who was seeing a therapist, brought him in for a couples counseling session. Now, I don't know your thoughts about that, but my immediate response was, oh, I don't know that that's how it's supposed to be. Obviously you can bring family members and you can bring spouses into sessions, with your therapist, but a couples counseling session with one of the partners, especially if they've had that therapist for a long time, I don't know. I mean, for me, that sometimes does set up the exact experience that Ted ended up having, which is sort of feeling immediately on the defensive and just feeling like he was being brought in to sort of be attacked for all the things that he didn't know he was doing wrong.
Yeah, I had that same reaction. Now, I think in smaller communities, or communities where there's not as much access to different types of therapists, the overlap of individual therapy and couples therapy happens. Generally, counselors don't want to do that for the reason you just described, which is this therapist knows his wife and knows how she feels about him, and knows the things that make her uncomfortable and unhappy, and like knows her view of Ted. So when Ted comes in, this therapist now has her own ideas of what she thinks Ted is like without having ever met him before. And you can't separate that from the work at hand. And then, so even let's say this was a really good couples therapist who was doing a really good job of like not taking sides or things like that, she's naturally going to need to ask more questions of Ted because she doesn't know Ted. She doesn't know where he's coming from. Whereas his wife, she'll be like, oh, I don't have to ask for this clarification about what she means because I already know. And I think that that could really lead to it feeling like, you know, like focused on Ted. And he said like he felt really attacked in that. And I would think so if you have two people basically staring at you, expecting you to answer for yourself, and the other person not needing to do it in the same way, that does become very one-sided.
Right. And obviously the long-term results of their relationship situation was that they ended up getting divorced. And Ted even acknowledges, like, you know, if she heard me referring to her as my wife, you know, she would be really upset about it. So it's like there's still a lot there for him, and the sort of way in which he looks at therapy even potentially contributing to the ways that in which the relationship ended. So
yeah,
you know, he's got some hangups, and we can understand why once he sort of explains it a little bit. But then we start to see some of that actual, you know, relationship development. We see Ted's attempt to, let's say, get in with her in the same way that he got in with Rebecca over time, over the course of season 1. And I just loved seeing her just sort of immediately have really good boundaries with him, you know, because it would have been really easy to just kind of take on that Midwestern charm and just sort of like, yeah, come on in, sure, give me shortbread cookies and yeah, let's have a grand old chat about, you know, the soccer team. But she doesn't really go for that. And you know, people I've talked to, and you know, obviously we get, you know, some more of Dr. Sharon's personality over the course of the season, but I think Ted's reacting to what he perceives as a general coldness, right? Those boundaries is just like coldness, like, oh, I try to give you cookies and you say you're sugar free. I try to make jokes and you just kind of stand there and look at me. You know, I try to do this and do that, and it's like none of it is playing well for him.
Yeah. I don't think so. There's boundaries and then there's unkindness. And I don't think she's, well, I also don't think she's unkind, but
no, I wouldn't say that either.
She is cold with him, right? So there's other people that she immediately meets them at their level. The way that we see it repeatedly is when she meets with people who speak French and who speak Spanish, she immediately is like,
yes,
you know, like, hola, you know, and like greets them like in their language and like meets them where they're at and where they need her to be. With Ted, she comes in real cold. And so, like, for instance, there are patients that I've had that also come in with this like intense, like, well, I'm going to win you over by smiling and being charming.
I'm going to be your best friend. Yeah. Yeah.
And I definitely also put up those boundaries pretty quickly, but I'll give like a smirk or like a recognition that their joke is intended to be a joke and things like that, because rapport is really important, and like not leaving people standing there feeling like crap like is important when it comes to rapport. And I kind of feel like, okay, so this is my take, is I kind of feel like they kind of hint that like, oh, she's so good at her jobs that she knows right off the bat that this is what he needs. But then they also play her as, well, I didn't know that this is what you needed. This was just my reaction to you. And both, I'm like, I don't really love either of those, because if that was just her reaction to him as a professional, she should have handled it better. And we all know that I hate the narrative of like therapists just know what people need just by looking at them.
Just like have a magic touch thing. Yeah.
So I don't love how she approaches him at the beginning. I do love that when he's in her room and he brings that to her, she just sits and watches him. Because at that point, there's an agreement that like, we're going to engage in a way that is meaningful for you. And so when he goes off on his whole rampage about like, do I lie down? Do I sit up? Do I put the pillow here? Do I not? She
Yeah. Oh
doesn't
man,
react at all. She
fascinating to
just
watch.
watches
Yeah.
him,
Yeah.
which is,
Yeah.
I'm guessing what
Yeah.
I would have done too. And when they were done, I would have been like, you comfortable? Like, you ready to go?
Are you okay? Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, I think those are my overall reactions as like kind of time passes, because she's pretty aggressive. So this is what's funny. So I know that we call me Dr. Hayley when we like introduce me, but I'm not like
Yes.
attached to my title at all. But in the beginning, when he calls her doc, which as somebody who has been called that and thinks that it's like a really fun thing to be called, when she goes, it's doctor, I was like, whoa, like,
Okay. Yeah.
he's not trying to undermine you, right? Like, so if somebody came into my session and called me miss as like a way to like tell me that they know more than me, or they are older than me and they are more knowledgeable than me or something like that, I would respond by referring to myself when I talk to them as like from Dr. Roberts and stuff like that, to,
Mm-hmm.
kind of be like, look, I do play a role in this. But to just like off the bat demand to be called doctor when somebody's calling you doc, I was like, that's pretty aggressive right off the bat.
Well, yeah, and even one of the first interactions, she asks Coach Lasso, like, "Are you good at your job?" And he's sort of like, "I don't know where this is going." "Yeah, I think so."
Uh-huh.
And she's basically like, "Good, because I'm twice as good at mine."
Mm-hmm.
So she comes in hot in that. And look, and we can, like, I think it's okay to be confident in your ability to do your job well. But I think the way Ted in particular receives that is sort of like, "Oh, so you're going to try to basically like tell me what to do, or tell me whether or not I'm doing a good job." So now all of a sudden he's on the defensive, just sort of automatically, because he had such, prior to her showing up, like there was no question that his imprint on this team, it was him. It was a reflection of him.
And especially
when we see totally, and when we see some of the various members of the team starting to go see her and have like, which I thought was funny, like Danny has his first session with her and he just like, comes bounding out of the session like, football is death and football is life, and she showed me all of these things in her first session, which realistically would have just been sort of an initial evaluation, but I'll let that go. And it's just like, Danny's all better, and look, he could do corner kicks, so he starts to feel like, well, I could have told him that football is death and life. Like, what thing did she do that was so special that he couldn't have just gotten from me?
Yeah. I mean, he's not wrong, right? Like, we can get the support that we get from therapists from other people, and a lot of people do. The difference is it's a unique relationship in that Ted decides Danny's fate, and Ted plays a role in Danny's life. And so Ted doesn't have the freedom to just speak with Danny in a way where Danny can speak back and engage, whereas Dr. Sharon does. Like, she is like, you know what? Like, talking to me doesn't affect anything. All it is talking. And so that's definitely the difference there. Yeah, I think it's hilarious that he's just like better after one session. I do want to say that this role, so being a team therapist, is a unique role that is not the same as what you and I would do if we found a therapist, or what
of course
an average person would do if they found a therapist. And there are many athletes who have their own individual therapists outside of their sport, and then also have their team therapist. Generally, the case is that the team therapist is a little bit like a school counselor, in that like people can come to them and talk to them individually, one-on-one, for therapy, but also that therapist is kind of there with the focus of how to get you to perform better. And a lot of time, someone's stress at home or with their family, with their relationships after killing a dog, like those things are the things that are getting in the way, that are generally giving them the yips. But it's slightly different. And so Sharon Dr. Sharon does some things with the team that you and I would never do with patients, right? So the way she kind of
Of course. Right.
casually engages with Ted would be inappropriate in an individual private practice. It's not inappropriate in her role because she's actually just an employee of the team. And so it actually looks a little bit different. There is still like confidentiality and things like that, but it really kind of depends on the contract, like who the patient is and sometimes or who the client is. Like sometimes it's the team, in which case like confidentiality looks slightly different. But it's up to the therapist to let each person that they meet with know, like, how much of this stays between you and me and how much of this can I talk to your coaches about and things like that. But that, yeah, I kind of went on a little bit of a tangent there, but I thought that it's important to kind of know how her role is slightly different than like yours or my
Yeah.
role.
So in other words, it's not that going to talk to Dr. Fieldstone would have required like a whole history taking. Like Danny could just come in and be like,
Yes.
I don't know what's wrong with me. I try to kick a penalty kick and I just sky it every time I see a cartoon dog, and it's like, okay, cool, let's deal with that. So they could jump right in that sense, but it still feels a little miracle-ish, sort of him just sort of bounding out after one session.
Of all the patients that I feel, or of all the players that I feel could have gone in and had a fix like that quickly, Danny's definitely the one.
That's fair point.
Because he's so enthusiastic about life that it feels like if you can just identify why this is a part of life and why this is okay, I could see him being like, oh, this too is beautiful.
Yeah.
Again,
just kind of get him back to that grounded state that he's already in.
Yeah. Do I think it would happen that quickly and that enthusiastically? I do not. But also, like, of all the characters, it's the one that it actually makes the most sense for.
Yeah. So, we see these sort of initial interactions, and Ted's a little bit concerned, a little bit suspicious about why now, after that positive experience with Danny, now she's just sort of, as you said, seeing all the different members of the team and all their different languages, and things are starting to develop for the team, and in good ways, right? So Dr. Sharon is, and one of the sort of interactions I really liked, where after she observes practice for a whole day, they kind of check in with each other, and she said, "Oh, I was gonna like leave you a voicemail," and Ted just wants the feedback right then and there in the parking lot. And she kind of says, well, it's basically like, yeah, sure, everything's fine, everyone's kind to each other, like you've built a very like supportive environment here. But is tying 8 matches in a row like the standard that you're looking for? And it's like, oh man. And like she still comes in real hot, and I think maybe that is what Ted needs, and he is pretty receptive to it, outside of that like therapeutic environment, at least at that stage. But I think that's, of course, sort of speaks to what we're talking about, like the role of the therapist in this context. It's like, yeah, everybody can be well regulated emotionally, but that's not the only purpose of having a therapist on an athletic team like the one we're talking about. That there's actually additional goals that could be addressed, that don't have to do anything with like childhood or whatever it might be.
Yes. So we, for the, I think it was called Going for Gold episode, we had Dr. Shane Sines on, and he is a sport and performance psychologist. And I think what's really important about that is, what I like about the phrase sport and performance is that what it shows is that it's not an emphasis on psychologists, it's an emphasis on your performance, right? And so that conversation that they have says that, like, you guys are great. You're happy, confident people for the most part. However, your performance is poor. So I'm here to help you as a team get through that so that you can perform better. And then what we as an audience know, and what Sharon starts to figure out pretty easily, is that a lot of it actually has to do with Ted, because the way that Ted is leading is not to the best of his ability, because of his own fears and his own anxiety and his own apprehension. And so he's kind of like, yep, even if I don't like it, it's good. Keep just, at least we're not losing kind of an attitude. Like that's kind of his vibe. And that's how they're playing. Yeah.
Well, right. And some of the one of the strategies he tries, which Dr. Shane observes, is summoning Led Tasso, right? This sort of alter ego Jekyll and Hyde version of himself, where, in an attempt to kind of make the team band together against him, he tries this sort of, I don't even know how we would call it. I mean, it's just like, it's like a doppelganger, an evil doppelganger of him, where he's just coming in hot, yelling at people, making them run laps, insulting them to their faces, and everyone is sort of confused and horrified, especially Beard.
Well, Beard's
because obviously he's seen this. Well, he's seen him try this before, and he's basically said it's like the worst case scenario. And it was interesting, from a motivational mental health standpoint, because I think this sort of dynamic that Ted is going for, right, the sort of unite the team against me or against the presence that I'm being, right, the thing that they're not used to, reminded me of some aspects of therapy, one in which I've sort of utilized myself when I worked with a young adult group. God, this is years ago now, but group therapy can be challenging at times, right? Group dynamics can be up and down, much like running a football team. And my co-group leader and I, one group day, decided to kind of basically, like, especially if the group wasn't, going particularly well, that we were just going to kind of take a big step back and be like, okay, if this is how group's going today, it's yours to run. We're just going to sit here and listen. And basically, like, yeah, we're here because, there has to be a therapist in the room by law, but we're done.
How did it go?
So kind of, have at it, like, run this group however you want for the rest of today's session. And, thinking back on that, much like Beard, there's this sort of inner, like, I don't know if this actually works. I don't know if this is effective. Is this helpful? Who is this helping? Are we just grasping at straws? But I do think it is a sort of, I don't know if I would say it's a tactic as much as an attempt on a therapist's part to kind of shake things up. Like, obviously the dynamic that's in play right now is not working, whether it's a group dynamic, a family dynamic, a couples dynamic. So I wanted to kind of get your thoughts on that, because I don't know, part of me was almost like apprehensive about, like, is it okay that I did this in retrospect? I sort of have mixed feelings about it, whatever it is, 10 years later. So what's your impression of, I guess, obviously Ted's attempts at this, but also like in therapy, like, is this something that sort of makes sense to utilize sometimes?
Yeah, I think it's great to use sometimes. I think like Beard said, it's one of the last attempts. And I'm thinking, particularly with a group of like teenagers and young adults, it's a good take, because oftentimes what they're rebelling against in group is the fact that there's another adult telling them what to do. And so to have an adult be like, you know what, you're right, I'm not going to tell you what to do, it gives them the opportunity to step up and do it. And in the moments that I've taken things like that in groups with young teenagers, inevitably there's one that steps up and that goes, guys, let's just do this. Like, let's just do it and get it done.
Yes.
And what I like about that is, it's not important that I'm good at running a group. It's important that the people who are there are doing what needs to be done for themselves. And I think and also actually in individual therapy, like, there have been times where I've come in and I've been like, you know what? I've been trying really hard, and it feels like no matter what I do, you've got a reason why this isn't helpful or this is not for you. And okay, then what is for you? Like, what can we do? And if they say nothing, I go like, okay, well then why do you keep coming every week? Like, if nothing that I do is helpful, why are you here? Now, obviously, I have that discussion in a way that is within the rapport that I have with the person.
Of course.
But I definitely think, like, it's super beneficial. It also, like, I think in a marriage, in a friendship, I think those conversations can also be meaningful of like, I feel like I'm trying really hard and it's not working anymore. What now? But again, being very careful how you have that conversation with the person that you're having it
Of
with.
course.
When it comes to Ted's team, he knows that the person who's going to step up and say, like, this is stupid is Jamie. Because Jamie's the only
Yes.
one who steps up and says, this is stupid. Like, no matter what it is, he's the one that's like,
Very
hey,
comfortable
stop it.
saying that.
Yeah,
Yes.
like, this is dumb.
Yeah.
Which is exactly what needs to be said in that moment, right? And so the other guys are kind of like, hey, we don't like it. And like, hey, please stop. But then Jamie's like, you need to stop this. Like, this is dumb. And then Ted takes that moment to be like, fine, you've earned the team practice canceled or whatever. And they're all like, thank goodness. And what he's done there is he's not only given them a common enemy of himself, but he's given Jamie an opportunity to step up for the team in the way that the team was not letting him do. And so Ted created this situation where he had them step up. And so there's definitely this concept of common enemy that can bind people together. It happens in couples therapy. Like sometimes a therapist kind of takes like a, well, this is just not going to work, it seems like, kind of approach, so that the couple can be like, no, we want, right now suddenly they're on the same page.
Yeah. Now they have to defend the relationship, or now they have to defend themselves.
Yeah. And they realize like, oh no, this is something I want to fight for, instead of just fighting against the other partner, right? However, it's actually what I really like that the show did is, yes, the common enemy brought the team together a little bit, but what really actually brought this team together was a shared value. So when, and lovingly enough, it was Jamie who also sparked this moment, but when Sam covered up the logo on the jersey, which that episode makes me cry every time I watch it. Oh my gosh, yeah. The team suddenly had a shared, they shared something with meaning, right? And so they were all working towards something together, and that brings people together so much more than disliking something or someone. And you see it a lot in friendship groups, like when there are those friend groups where like they're bonding over like, oh, we don't like this person or we don't like this thing. Those friendships are kind of tentative. Like they're based on like, as long as we all dislike this same thing, we're good. But like, if that goes away, then what? As opposed to like, hey, let's find stuff that we do like and is meaningful, and let's work towards that together. That brings people together so much more.
Yeah, I totally agree. That's, when we're doing like goal setting, it's not, what do you want to stop doing? It's like, yeah, okay, that's important, but what do you want to do instead? What are we moving towards, not just what are we moving away from? So I really like that.
I always tell people when they say like, well, I don't want to X, Y, and Z, I go, what does that tell you about what you do want? And our mind doesn't like gaps, right? I say this all the time. Absence, and so if you say, I don't want to walk down the street anymore, it's like, okay, well, what do you want to do in place of that? So if you need to get somewhere and you don't want to walk down the street, what do you want to do? Oh, well, I want to walk a safer direction, or I want to walk. Okay, great. What's a safer direction? Right. I don't want to do X doesn't tell you anything, but the I do want to do gives you a direction to work in.
Yeah, and we see Ted starting to work in a direction, or at least start and stopping a lot once his stress, his anxiety kind of gets to the peaking point of a panic attack in the middle of a match against Tottenham. I think in episode 6, he walks off the field in the middle of at that point, like the most important game of the season. And luckily the team sort of rallies and wins the game, but he is, despite his excuse of food poisoning, not in a great place. And Dr. Sharon finds him in her office late that night, and then they finally sort of embark on an actual therapeutic relationship, despite him like 2 or 3 times in a row like trying to start the session and then leaving and slamming the door for various reasons. One of which I wanted to kind of ask you about, because I see it fairly frequently, which is Ted makes the point of, oh, and how much do you get paid, or how long is the session, is the first question. It's like, oh, well, we do 50 minutes or 45 minutes, and he's like, you get paid by the hour though, right? And she's like, yes. And he sort of bites on that, and it's like, well, you see, all of this is BS. And that's why it's basically not for me. He jumps out of his chair, slams the door, and he's done. And, and the next time he comes back, as he said, he doesn't quit. So he does come back, and Dr. Sharon, to her credit, I thought, like, confronts that moment and that idea really well. She basically says, I loved this sort of line of questioning from her, which was, would you coach for free? And he's like, yeah, of course I would. And it's like, do you coach for free though? No. Okay. And because you get paid, does that mean you care any less about your players? Well, no, of course not. Of course I care about them. Okay. So then is it okay for me if I get paid and I do whatever 50-minute sessions, and is it also possible that I care about you? Can all of those things be true?
Yeah.
And he kind of takes that and it finally kind of clicks for him that they are in many ways like in similar positions. And I just loved that we were able to kind of see his walls start to come down as she stayed right there with him. She didn't say, oh no, you can't come back in my office. You've slammed the door and left 2 sessions in a row. She didn't reject him because he, insulted her profession. She was right there with him. Every time he was willing to try again, she was there. And I just thought that was a really powerful display of, what therapy with someone who is skeptic and apprehensive about it can really look like.
Yeah.
So how do you deal with, because I imagine maybe patients, as they have with me, sort of like get stuck on this idea of, do you really care about me, or is this just a job for you? Which is basically what Ted sort of accuses Sharon of.
Yeah. One thing that I want to also address is the idea of, like, because I hear this so often, the 50-minute session, but the hour pay or whatever.
Therapy hour. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
We get paid for an hour of work. 50 to 55 minutes of that is face-to-face therapy. And that's like, if Ted only got paid for showing up to practice and to games, if he only got paid for that, that would be like us only getting paid for our 50, 55 minutes. But Ted gets paid to watch video and to come up with plays and to think about which players will play best where. And that's what our extra 5-10 minutes is we take notes, we do billing, we look up resources that we offered you, we schedule, we do all these other things that are work for this patient in that what usually ends up being 5 minutes. And so we get paid for an hour's worth of work, and 50, 55 minutes of that work is face-to-face therapy. The other is paperwork. And so I think that that's really important, because people are like, well, I'm paying you for an hour. Yes, you're paying me for an hour of work. But actually, I never word it as an hour. I always word it as a 50 or 55-minute session, because that's what people are getting from me. With regard to this concept of, is it just a job for you? Do you really care? I don't get that question very often.
That's good.
I don't even know that I've ever gotten it. Now, I'm going to give this answer, and I think people need to realize, like, I'm somebody who's very matter of fact about life in so many ways. And my thing is, like, it does not matter if I care about my patients or not, as long as they feel cared for. That's all that matters. So if I am in that time that they see me each week, they feel that this is a person who shows up, who cares for me, who wants to hear from me, who wants to help me. Like, if when that computer closes or that door closes, whether I continue to care about them or not does not matter. And people don't love to hear therapists say stuff like this, because the whole thing is like the relationship, and people like to think that a relationship has to be kind of this all-consuming thing, no matter who the relationship is with. And I see it a lot when somebody's like, oh, they're my best friend. And then I'm like, are you their best friend? And like, people are like, don't ask me that question. I don't want to think that it's different on different sides. And I'm like, but why does it matter? If they play a huge, so for example, some self-disclosure, my best friend, her best friend is somebody that she has known since she was born. So like, of course I don't have that role in her life because I haven't known her that long, but I don't have anybody in my life like that. So she is the most amazing friend that I have. And I think that that's really important for people to know, is that like the way that you feel about a relationship, as long as that person is meeting those needs, that's all that really matters. Now, if a patient brought it up to me, I'm guessing I would ask them, do you feel cared for? Like, am I meeting your needs? And if they said like, yeah, I think so. And then I'd say like, well, there you go. I care for you. Because that's what it is, right? Now, also that being said, like 99% of my patients I really like. Like, I really like the people that I work with.
Yeah.
Whether I think about them after the session or not depends on the patient and what gets stuck in my brain about their sessions. But the majority of my patients I really like. And so like, yeah, I care about you. You're also not somebody that I can ever talk about outside of this session. And so like, I think that's also a thing. And I know I've talked for a long time, but I think people who are in therapy get to go to their friends and their family members and talk about their therapist. Like, my therapist said, and so you as a therapist become a part of their everyday life. Whereas for us, we don't get to talk about people that way. And so our relationship with them stays really captured in that session and in those notes. And so it doesn't bleed into other areas of our life.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you brought up friends because as Ted is sort of acclimating to his relationship with Doc, he goes to Rebecca after his sort of like attempt to connect with her doesn't go well. And they both kind of bond over this idea that like, well, this is just, you're just supposed to have your friends, right? You're just supposed to talk to your friends, like all those intimate details. And like, you just, that's what their friends are for, right? You don't have to, spill your soul to this, person with a PhD on their wall. But then after they both agree about that, Rebecca asks him, or Ted asks her, yeah, so anything you want to talk about? Like how's and then she's like, no, I don't think so. Meanwhile, like we know all the things that are going on with her. And she asks, like, what about you? Anything you want to talk about?
No, I'm good.
No, I'm good.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, so it's great to have that idea in theory that yes, your friends are people you could open up to. But if we're acknowledging that we don't necessarily use those relationships in that way, and therapy could fill that gap, then well, like, hey, how nice that you don't have to only have your friends for that type of emotional support.
Yeah. And on the other side of it, Jamie comes to Keely and wants to talk to her about the stuff that's bothering him. And she goes, come with me. And she takes him to the therapist and is like, here's the person for that. And then he has a quote right after that, which I love, is he goes, so what, do I just sit here and blabber on and on about myself? And she goes, basically, and he goes, nice. Which I think is like a really wonderful, like,
totally
description of therapy, which is like, where else in the world do you get however long you have your sessions for that's literally just about you?
Just to show up and be, yeah.
And like your therapist may interject things about themselves in order to help you, but it's just because of you. Like, it's all about you. And that's such a unique and cool experience to have.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, and we get a lot of the characters' experiences and like deep dives of sort of what they're dealing with. The one episode in particular I'm thinking about is I want to say it's the 7th one, where it's the episode after Ted's first panic attack, where we kind of get basically different characters kind of finally dealing with their stuff in an honest way. Keely's honest and open with Roy about her needing space. Ted is honest about the fact that he had a panic attack and finally starts down this road of actual opening up with Dr. Sharon.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting. I mean, so as a whole, I mean, some of the criticism of Ted Lasso season 2 is that, not that much happens.
Yeah, I
But
agree.
for me, and I'm assuming for you as well, the sort of emotional journeys that we get from a lot of these individual characters is so powerful and is so revealing that for me, I there was not a moment of the season where I was like, I'm kind of bored. Like, what's really happening?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, I don't know for you if you've had that same experience or not.
Yeah, I think the one episode where I was like, what's happening was the Coach Beard episode. And then I found out
Sure.
later that actually they got an extension on their season. And so they got to
Yes.
just put new episodes in.
They got to play. Yeah.
Yeah, but they didn't know how to do that without like interrupting like the actual story. And so the two
Right.
episodes that they added were the Coach Beard episode, which I thought was great because we never get to just see him in his own
Mm-hmm.
world. That's kind of what I expected his world to look like. So to be fair, I'm like, okay, yeah, that's what I
Sure.
pictured.
Yep.
And then the Christmas episode. Those are
Christmas.
the
Yes.
two that
Christmas, which was
they,
great.
yeah,
Yeah.
those are the two that they kind of threw in just because they got extra time. And I thought that was,
Yep.
I thought that was great. But yeah, like I agree that like I didn't enjoy it as much as the first season. And I think because they said so much more during this season, right? Like the whole Sam
Yeah.
narrative I thought was like wonderful. Like I said, it makes me cry so much because it's so beautiful. But like they said a lot with that. And then obviously like Nate's whole journey, which we'll get into in another episode.
Yes, we will.
But like Nate's whole journey made it hard to watch. And I think what was so nice
Mm-hmm.
about season 1 was that the emotionality of it was pretty easy. Like Ted had a
Yeah,
couple
that's
panic
true.
attacks, but it like wasn't so
Yep.
bad. But with this one, like they're bringing up so much stuff, like Rebecca dating Sam. I'm like, this is so inappropriate. Like you're his
Yeah.
boss, but also like you want to root for a love story. And so like that's kind of stressful. And then again, like the Nate story is so stressful. And I think that's what makes it different than season 1. And also it's still just
Yeah.
lovely.
Oh yeah. Well, and so we get even more of a relationship development between Ted and Dr. Sharon. I think sort of what Ted secretly wanted all along,
Uh-huh.
right, is to be friends.
Uh-huh.
So as they work through some of Ted's deeper issues with his panic attacks and marriage and all these sorts of things that he's been through, we also start to see the softer side of Dr. Sharon.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the episodes that I really liked was seeing her have a little bicycle accident, right? And
Uh-huh.
then Ted's there to kind of help her out. And now the roles are reversed in how they help support each other. And it does start to look more like a friendship. So it's a really interesting challenge for a therapist because even in a team context, I don't think you'd have any expectation of having, your patient in your apartment.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's where it gets a little tricky is that Ted starts seeing Sharon as his therapist and then they become friends. And so that's like a little
Yep.
bit tricky. And again, like a little bit Hollywood because like
Yeah.
if she was not seeing him as his therapist, that whole relationship would be totally normal in terms of a team
Yeah.
therapist.
Great. Colleagues, basically.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. But yeah, I also what I really love that they represent is that she has a therapist.
Of
I
course.
love
Yes.
that. I
Yes.
was like, yes, let's
Yeah.
remind people that our therapists are people because so often
Mm-hmm.
on the internet, I will see people say things about therapists and I'm like, people really think that there's some kind of like god of some kind? Like what is happening? Like why do you think that these people aren't just people? But anyway, that's a different story. So yeah, I do think that like because of who Ted is, it makes sense that that happened. But to be totally honest, if it were me and even if I like had fallen and had an accident and like had accidentally called a patient, that wouldn't happen because I have two different phones, but let's say that it
Right. Yep.
happened
Sure.
and that person showed up to the hospital, I would say, thank you very much. I appreciate the concern. Go home. Like, we
Yeah.
will discuss this in our next session. So I do think that that's a little creepy, but they do in the show make the transition then from like she's kind of no longer his therapist and now they're friends. So it's kind of tricky ground.
Well, it's very
Yeah.
tricky. And I think that's why, we were sort of excited to talk about this season because it is such a unique dynamic between patient and therapist
Mhm.
that they go through. And all along, sort of all Ted wants is for Dr. Sharon to open up to him and tell him her favorite book and,
Mhm.
her hopes and dreams. And you can just tell that, like, that's the kind of relationship Ted wants. And they sort of do end up getting there. But then, eventually, obviously, Dr. Sharon is in the process of leaving the team. And the moment when Ted sort of finds out that, oh, she just wanted to give him a letter basically as a way of
Mhm.
saying goodbye and moving on from the team. He takes it as you were only going to give me a letter. You weren't going to say goodbye. You weren't going to talk together as
Mhm.
friends one more time, basically.
Which I think is fair.
And we see this sort of, yeah, well, it's, we see the most vulnerable side of Dr. Sharon, which is
Mhm.
basically like, this was the only way she knew how to communicate these feelings.
Which she's not twice as good at her job if that's how she communicates goodbyes.
Well, right. That's why I bring this up because, maybe there certainly could have been a better way to do that.
Mhm.
And to your point, not only are our therapists human, but in so being human that we are flawed, right?
Mhm.
Sometimes there are things that we are better at than others, but that's where the blurred lines of this relationship become really interesting
Mhm.
because and I think there's a quote at some point where it's like, things come into your life to help you lead to the next thing, which is,
Mhm.
a very nice sort of like colloquialism, true or not. But I think they try to illustrate that with Dr. Sharon, being that she does just sort of in some ways like get dropped into Ted's life. And obviously benefits him greatly, but
Mhm.
also, as a result of just sort of being in Ted's gravity, you also have to now become like a more emotionally connected or like
Yeah.
vulnerable person. So it's
Yeah.
just really interesting the way that they
Super
highlight
interesting.
that.
Yeah. I believe as a therapist, the most important part of it is the ending of it. And does that mean it has to end in a certain way? No, it has to end in the way that's right for that person. So for
Hmm.
some people, it's they never reschedule with you. But what you need to do
Right.
as a therapist is you reach out and you say, like, if you'd like to reschedule, please give me a call. If I don't hear from you by this date, I'll go ahead and close your file, but you can always reach out if you want to schedule again.
Hmm.
Because what you've done there is
Yep.
you've let that person do what they need to do. And you've said, like, I'm here.
Yep.
There's other patients who I've been working with for years, and they go from every week to every other week to once a month until they're finally like, I don't think I need therapy anymore. And then they're like, I can come in and do a closure session. And they're like, I'm sure I'll be back. Sometimes with those people, I'm like, do you want to do a closure session? And they're like, not really. I'm like, great. Like, because for them, it's not, there doesn't need to be this closure because they're just kind of moving on as we want them to do as their therapist. And then there's other patients who I've seen them every single week, and then either I'm leaving or they're leaving, or
Yep.
they just
Sure.
decide to end therapy, even though the work is still very actively ongoing. Those people I
Hmm.
always want to meet with and have a session with and talk about, like, what does this mean for you? What does this mean about therapy in the future? What are you going to take forward with you? Things like that. And that's because we see with Ted, bad experiences with therapy in the past can lead to it being hard to have therapy in the future. And so,
Mm.
one of the greatest things that we can do is we can end it on a really powerful, good note. And I always say to my patients, if you can do this with me, you can do it with someone else. I am a great therapist. I'm very good at my job, but I am not the only one. So if you can do this with me,
Hmm.
you can do it with somebody else, and not just therapy. Like, if you can relate to
Right.
me in this way, you can relate to any
Yes.
human in this way. And I think that that's really important. She just like if you said to a patient like, "Hey, my like contract's coming to an end next week. I won't get to see you before then, but I'll leave you in like a letter." That's also kind of okay because sometimes that's showing like circumstances aren't ideal, but I will give you a heads up and I will give you some closure, to just like leave is wild to me. So then I really like what they do is they go and they hang out socially, and then Ted just leaves. And I love that because he gets to leave on his own terms.
Yeah.
And he leaves in his very Ted way, which is like, here's the army man.
Yes.
Which I think is great, and also made me think of Sam, who's wonderful, because he's like, I don't want this. And Ted's like, that makes sense. But that was in season 1.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's my thought about her just like up and writing that letter. Like, again, for Leslie, what's his last name?
Higgins.
Yeah. He's the director of something or other. For Higgins, the letter was fine because that was his relationship with her.
Yeah.
Like, he was like, cool, great. We're passing in the night as you use my office. Yeah. Like, thanks for my office bag.
Yeah.
But for him, it was great. For Ted, it was really not great. If she like didn't say goodbye to Danny, maybe it would be fine. Maybe she and Danny have not spoken since that first session, right? In which case their closure happened forever ago.
Yeah.
So yeah, that made me so angry. I was like, you can't just leave. Thank goodness she has a therapist, because that's actually kind of problematic for her patients.
Yeah. So Hayley, I'm wondering if we should acknowledge that we are going to do at least one, maybe multiple more episodes on Ted Lasso season 2. We are not going to leave out Nate. We want to do a whole discussion about Nate's sort of descent, as well as, some of our favorite quotes from the season. So before we do that and talk more about that stuff,
I'm going to pause you for 1 second.
Okay.
What was it that I said that I was like, I have a thought on that? And the funny thing about the Higgins office situation is when there's a therapist who joins a team like that, it is very seldom that they get an office. Usually they are the ones that are like, let's step into this closet for a bit, or like
popping around.
Like, oh, look, the weight room is empty. Let's step in here. Like, the number of times I've had to get creative about where I meet somebody, either at a school or at a hospital, or like in a like in an inpatient unit, or like in a probation office, like things like that. So when I saw that they were like, here, just have this office, and then Higgins was bouncing around, I was like, that's nice. That's not usually how that happens.
Well, I mean, I think that tells us way more about Higgins than it does about like
100%.
Therapy in these sorts of contexts.
Yeah. 100%.
Higgins very content to just let whatever people's needs are take precedence. So
Higgins is
love Higgins. Why don't we do some ratings of Ted and Dr. Sharon Fieldstone's relationship?
I think that's great. So, on a scale from 1 to 5 Greyhound puppies from, I think it's called Barkingham Palace, which is so cute.
Yes, very good. Yes.
How accurate do you feel that therapy as a whole was represented in season 2 of Ted Lasso?
So yeah, we pointed out some of the things that don't feel quite right, whether it's the relationship dynamics, whether it's the sort of miracle one session. But that being said, I thought a lot of the depictions were pretty close. Like, I was happy watching it. I mean, we'll kind of lead that into like the entertainment piece of this, which is this idea that therapy is a very normal, ideally structured opportunity for teams, people, couples, individuals to sort of take advantage of the support that it offers. So from that standpoint, I was really happy with Dr. Sharon Fieldstone's representation. But because of some of the specifics of the relationship dynamics, I thought some of that was probably not very accurate. So I'm going to give it like a 3.95, like good, but missing some things, or maybe generalizing some things, or like therapy cliches that sort of, as we've acknowledged before, like sort of Hollywoodized what exactly happens in this context.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty accurate rating. It's a little bit tougher to think about those relationship dynamics because it does look different when you are an organization's therapist rather than a person's therapist. So,
yeah. So in thinking about the sort of entertainment piece of this relationship, on a scale of 1 to 5, boppy birds on Dr. Sharon's desk, which made me ask if you have any, like, what did Ted call them, like accoutrement, like in your therapy office. How sort of entertaining or what sort of vibes and value did you find that the therapy and mental health portion brought to season 2?
Yeah, absolutely. I do have accoutrement. I have my favorite one is I have Sadness from Inside Out sitting on my
Of
shelf
course.
because sadness is the one that ultimately saved the day.
That's right.
And I have a Rubik's Cube. Those are, but also like I do telehealth now, and so so
it's not as much fun.
Yeah, the engagement value of the things that I have, because I used to have like silly putty and fidget toys and all those sorts of things lying around. Have no need for those anymore, so those are in a box somewhere.
So sad.
But the things that I can display, those are on the shelf behind me when I do therapy. On a scale from 1 to 5 of the boppy bird toys on her desk, which I actually had no idea what you were talking about until I saw your hand movement. I was like, oh,
so
yes,
I was
that
doing
thing.
This.
Yeah. I am going to, so it's a weird answer. So I'm going to give it a 4 in terms of how I think it adds to the storyline. So I think they bring up things that require attention in a meaningful way. So like right off the bat, Danny.
Yep.
How are we going to get Danny through this? It's also clear that they needed to bring up something like that so that Dr. Sharon could come, so that we could move the storyline along for Ted, because Ted was never going to find a therapist on his own.
For sure.
And so I definitely think that the therapy storyline adds really well, or adds a lot to the storyline. I think the Danny piece is very entertaining. So I think that that's just super funny. So I'm like, like that. It brought entertainment in that way. When it comes to Ted, that's not really the entertaining piece of Ted. That's the human piece of Ted. And so do I think that the therapy was entertaining in that way? No, not really. But I still give it a 4 in terms of like how it added to the overall storyline. I think it was a very necessary storyline based on what they set up in season 1. And we spoke in season 1 that like if Ted were always this upbeat person, he would be hard to relate to and would kind of suck a little bit. And so having this storyline actually allows us as a whole to like Ted more. So definitely adds to it.
Yeah, right. So if you're interested, check out our season 1 episode. We go through all like toxic positivity and all the sort of interesting dynamics that Ted has when he initially comes into the team. So definitely check that episode out. Hayley, we're going to wrap this episode up, but definitely look out for more content from us on Ted Lasso, because we are going to dive into Nate the Great, as well as some of our favorite quotes and sort of, the feelings that they brought up for us. So thank you all, as always, for listening to Pop Psych 101. Check us out on all the different social channels at Pop Psych 101. And thanks, as always, for listening.
Bye-bye.
Bye.